The morning mist clung to the forest floor like ghostly fingers as Marcus Chun adjusted his scanner's frequency. 3 weeks into his reconnaissance mission on Kepler 442b, the young human scout had grown comfortable with the rhythms of this alien world. The towering purple-bark trees stretched impossibly high, their canopies so dense that only scattered beams of the orange sun pierced through to illuminate the undergrowth below. Marcus paused beside a massive trunk, its circumference easily 50 meters around. His breath formed small clouds in the cool air as he documented the unusual crystalline formations growing from the tree's base. These structures pulsed with a faint bioluminescence, something his preliminary reports had noted, but never fully explained. The Terran Colonial Survey needed detailed analysis of this planet's ecosystem before approving it for settlement. A sharp crack echoed through the forest, followed by the distinctive hum of energy weapons powering up. Marcus dropped behind the crystalline growths, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had been careful, following all stealth protocols, maintaining radio silence except for scheduled check-ins. How had they found him? Through the gaps in the crystal formations, Marcus saw them emerge from behind the trees. 3 figures in sleek, form-fitting armor that shifted color to match their surroundings. Zalithian enforcers, their elongated heads swept back and forth, searching, while their forearms moved independently, 2 holding advanced plasma rifles while the others manipulated scanning devices. The Zalithians were known throughout the galaxy as the self-appointed guardians of primitive worlds. They claimed to protect developing ecosystems from outside interference, but everyone knew the truth. They wanted these worlds for themselves, adding them to their ever-expanding empire under the guise of environmental protection. Marcus activated his emergency beacon with trembling fingers, knowing it would take hours for any rescue to arrive. The nearest human vessel was 3 systems away, and, even at maximum burn, they couldn't reach him in time. He watched the enforcers spread out in a standard search pattern, their movements precise and coordinated. The lead enforcer, distinguished by the silver markings on his armor, gestured with 2 of his arms. His translator device crackled to life, filling the forest with his harsh, metallic voice. "Human Scout, your presence here violates Zalithian protected space, Accord 779. Surrender immediately, and you'll be processed according to galactic law." Marcus knew what processed meant. The Zalithians had a reputation for making inconvenient witnesses disappear. His hand moved to the sidearm at his hip, but he knew it would be useless against their advanced armor. 3 against 1, with superior technology and training. The math was simple and terrifying. The enforcers continued their methodical search, moving closer to his hiding spot with each passing moment. Marcus tried to control his breathing, knowing that even the smallest sound could give him away. The crystalline formations provided visual cover, but they wouldn't stop the Zalithians' thermal scanners for long. As the silver-marked leader approached his position, Marcus noticed something strange. The massive trees around them seemed to shiver, their enormous branches creaking softly despite the absence of any wind. The bioluminescent crystals began pulsing faster, their glow intensifying. Even the forest floor seemed to vibrate beneath his feet. The enforcer stopped, tilting his head as if listening to something Marcus couldn't hear. His scanning device began emitting a rapid series of beeps, and the alien's posture shifted from confident to alert. He spoke quickly in his native language to his companions, who immediately raised their weapons and formed a defensive circle. Marcus felt it then, a presence vast and ancient stirring around them. The feeling was impossible to describe, like being watched by something immeasurably old and patient. The air itself seemed to thicken, charged with potential energy that made his skin tingle. The massive trees swayed more noticeably now, and he could swear he heard something like breathing, slow and deep, coming from the forest itself. The silver-marked enforcer barked orders at his team, but his voice carried an edge of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. They were predators who had suddenly realized they might not be at the top of the food chain after all. Marcus remained motionless, sensing that whatever was awakening in the forest around them was far more dangerous to the Zalithians than they could possibly imagine. The forest continued its ominous awakening as the Zalithian enforcers grew increasingly agitated. Their scanning devices now screamed constant warnings, overwhelmed by energy readings that defied their understanding. The silver-marked leader barked commands in his harsh native tongue, but Marcus could hear the growing panic in his voice. Suddenly, the massive tree beside Marcus began to move. Not sway or bend, but actually move, its enormous trunk rotating with deliberate purpose. The crystalline formations at its base pulsed brighter, and Marcus realized with growing amazement that they weren't random growths at all. There was some kind of sensory apparatus, neural networks that connected the trees to something far larger than he had ever imagined. The Zilithian with the scanning device stumbled backward, all four of his arms trembling as his equipment registered impossible readings. He shouted something that Marcus's universal translator rendered as, "Life signs everywhere. The whole forest is alive." The silver-marked leader spun around, his plasma rifle charging with a high-pitched whine. "Impossible. Our surveys showed only simple plant life. These are primitive trees, nothing more." But even as he spoke, the ground beneath their feet began to shift. What Marcus had taken for forest floor revealed itself to be something else entirely. A vast network of root-like structures that pulsed with the same bioluminescence as the crystals. The trees weren't separate organisms at all. They were appendages, sensory organs of something unimaginably vast. Marcus pressed himself against the crystalline formation, feeling a strange warmth emanating from within. Through the translucent surface, he could see complex patterns of light flowing like neural pathways. The structure seemed to recognize his presence, its glow shifting to a softer, almost welcoming hue. Somehow, he sensed no threat from this ancient intelligence, only curiosity and a deep, patient awareness. The Zilithians were not receiving the same courtesy. The trees around them began to lean inward, their massive branches creaking ominously as they formed a natural cage. The forest floor rose in places, creating barriers that herded the three enforcers together into an increasingly small space. What had been a simple hunt was rapidly becoming a trap. The youngest of the enforcers, his armor bearing only basic rank markings, raised his weapon toward the nearest tree. "Sir, should we engage?" These readings suggest some form of intelligence, but our protocols clearly state, "Our protocols don't cover this," the leader snapped, his four eyes darting between the encroaching trees. "Fall back to extraction point Alpha. Wheel orbital bombardment this sector and file a report about dangerous plant mutations." But as they turned to retreat, their path was blocked. More trees had moved during their brief exchange, creating an impassable wall of living wood. The enforcers found themselves surrounded, their technological superiority meaningless against an opponent they couldn't properly target or understand. Marcus watched in fascination as the crystalline formation beside him began to pulse in complex patterns. He had studied xenobiology extensively during his training, and he recognized what he was seeing, a form of communication. The forest was trying to speak, its ancient mind awakening to deal with the threat posed by the Zilithians. The air around the trapped enforcers began to shimmer, and Marcus felt a subtle shift in atmospheric pressure. Spores, nearly invisible to the naked eye, began drifting down from the canopy above. The Zilithians' environmental suits immediately detected the change, their filtration systems activating with urgent whirs and clicks. Unknown biological agents detected. The youngest enforcer reported, his voice tight with fear. "Filtration holding, but these compounds are unlike anything in our databases. Sir, I recommend immediate evacuation." The silver-marked leader's composure finally cracked. He opened fire on the nearest tree, his plasma bolts striking the massive trunk in brilliant flashes. The energy dissipated harmlessly across the bark surface, absorbed and redirected through the tree's internal structure. Instead of damage, the attack only seemed to irritate the forest entity, and the ground beneath the enforcer's feet began to sink. Marcus realized he was witnessing something unprecedented, a planetary intelligence defending itself. The trees weren't just connected. They were components of a single, vast organism that spanned continents, perhaps the entire world. The Zilithians had made the fatal mistake of threatening something that had been growing and thinking for millions of years. The spore concentration increased, and despite their filtration systems, the enforcers began to stumble. Their movements became sluggish, their coordination failing as the forest's defense mechanisms took hold. Marcus remained unaffected, protected by the crystalline formation that seemed to shelter him within its gentle glow. As the silver-marked leader collapsed to his knees, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers, Marcus understood that he was witnessing the birth of a legend. The Zilithians had come hunting a lone human scout, but they had awakened something far more ancient and powerful than they could have imagined. The spores continued their relentless descent as the Zilithian enforcers fought a losing battle against an enemy they couldn't comprehend. Their advanced suits, designed to protect against known biological threats, proved useless against compounds that had evolved over geological timescales. The youngest enforcer was the first to fall completely, his forearms going limp as he toppled sideways into the soft, pulsing ground. Marcus watched in amazement as the forest floor began to change around the fallen alien. What had appeared to be ordinary soil revealed itself to be a complex organic matrix that responded to the enforcer's presence. Tendrils of the same crystalline material that surrounded Marcus began to grow from the ground, but these moved with obvious hostile intent, wrapping around the unconscious Zilithian's limbs. The silver-marked leader struggled to remain standing, his plasma rifle wavering as he fought against the effects of the spores. "This is impossible," he gasped through his suit's communication system. No planet-class organism could exist. The energy requirements alone would be. His words were cut off as the tree beside him suddenly sprouted a new appendage, a thick, vine-like growth that moved with deliberate purpose. The appendage wrapped around his weapon, and Marcus heard the distinct sound of advanced alloys being crushed like paper. The rifle's power core sparked once before going dark, leaving the leader defenseless. The remaining enforcer, the one with the scanning equipment, tried to run, but the forest had other plans. The ground beneath his feet became soft and yielding like quicksand, causing him to sink up to his ankles. He pulled desperately at his legs while his scanner continued its frantic warnings about massive energy signatures surrounding them on all sides. Marcus felt the crystalline formation beside him pulse with what he could only interpret as satisfaction. Through its translucent surface, he watched the patterns of light shift and flow and gradually began to recognize a form of communication. The entity was trying to tell him something, showing him images that formed in the crystal's depths. He saw the forest as it truly was, a single consciousness that had grown to span continents, its root system extending deep into the planet's core, where it drew energy from geological processes. This was no ordinary plant life, but something that existed on a scale that challenged every assumption about biological limitations. It had been sleeping, growing slowly for millions of years, until the Zilithians' aggressive scans and weapons fire had finally roused it to action. The images in the crystal showed him more. Other worlds where the Zilithians had come as protectors, only to strip away resources and enslave populations. The forest entity had somehow accessed the memories contained within the enforcer's equipment, learning about their true nature in moments. What it had discovered had triggered an ancient defense protocol that hadn't been activated for millennia. The silver-marked leader made one last desperate attempt to contact his ship. His communication device crackled to life, and Marcus heard him shouting coordinates and requesting immediate orbital bombardment of his position. But even as he spoke, vines began growing up his body, interfering with his equipment and muffling his voice. "Negative on the bombardment," came the reply from orbit. "Unknown energy interference is blocking our targeting systems. Extraction team is en route, but we're reading massive power signatures across the entire continent. Recommend immediate fallback to minimum safe distance." The leader's eyes widened in terror as he realized his own ship was abandoning him. The Zilithians were renowned for their cold efficiency, and leaving behind compromised assets was standard protocol. He and his team had become acceptable losses the moment the situation had moved beyond their control. Marcus watched the final enforcer sink further into the yielding ground, his struggles growing weaker as the spores took full effect. The forest response had been swift and decisive, neutralizing the threat with a combination of biological weapons and environmental manipulation that showcased an intelligence operating on a completely different level from anything the galaxy had seen before. The crystalline formation pulsed again, and new images appeared in its depths. Marcus saw himself, but not as he was now. The entity was showing him possibilities, potential futures where humans and this planetary consciousness could work together. Unlike the Zilithians, who saw only resources to exploit, the forest sensed something different in humanity, a species capable of true partnership rather than domination. As the last of the enforcers lost consciousness, the massive trees began to move again, their branches reaching down to carefully collect the subdued aliens. Marcus realized he was witnessing something that would change the balance of power in this sector of the galaxy forever. The Zilithians had hunted a human scout, but they had awakened an ancient warrior that spanned an entire world. The forest had chosen sides in the conflict between expansion and preservation, and it had chosen humanity. The Zilithian enforcers now hung, suspended in cocoons of crystalline growth, their bodies preserved but completely immobilized. Marcus could see them breathing through the translucent walls of their prisons, but their eyes stared unseeing into the distance, lost in whatever dreams the forest entity had induced. The ancient consciousness had chosen to spare them, but only as living repositories of information about their empire's weaknesses. Marcus felt the ground beneath him shift, but unlike the hostile response the Zilithians had experienced, this movement was gentle, almost reverent. The forest floor formed a natural platform that lifted him higher, bringing him level with the lower branches of the massive trees. From this new vantage point, he could see the true scope of what surrounded him. The forest stretched to the horizon in every direction, but now he understood that every tree, every vine, every blade of grass was part of a single entity. Bioluminescent pathways pulsed beneath the surface, carrying information at incredible speeds across vast distances. This wasn't just a planet with life on it. This was a living planet, awakened and aware. The crystalline formation beside him grew larger, its surface becoming mirror-smooth. Images flowed across it like a living screen, showing him the planet's history. He saw its youth, when it was just beginning to achieve consciousness through the connection of its scattered root systems. He witnessed the first alien visitors millions of years ago, peaceful explorers who had studied and departed without causing harm. The entity had learned from them, growing in knowledge and wisdom. Then came darker times. The images showed the arrival of various hostile species over the millennia, each seeking to exploit the planet's resources. The entity had defended itself before, but always passively, hiding its true nature until the threats departed. The Zilithians represented something new and more dangerous, a species that wouldn't be discouraged by simple defensive measures. Marcus's communication device suddenly crackled to life, startling him. It was Captain Sarah Okafor, commander of the Terran research vessel Prometheus. "Marcus, we're reading massive energy signatures from your sector. Are you secure? Your emergency beacon went active 4 hours ago." "Captain," Marcus replied, his voice filled with wonder, "you're not going to believe what I've found here. The planet itself is alive, and it just took down 3 Zilithian enforcers without breaking a sweat." There was a long pause before Okafor responded. "Son, your beacon shows you've been in the same location for hours. Are you experiencing any symptoms of atmospheric poisoning? Hallucinations? Disorientation?" Marcus laughed, the sound echoing through the vast forest. "No, Captain. I'm perfectly fine. In fact, I think I'm about to become humanity's first ambassador to a planetary intelligence. The entity here, it's been studying the Zilithians through their equipment. It knows about their empire, their methods, everything. And it's decided to work with us instead of them." The crystalline screen showed new images. Zilithian ships in orbit beginning to retreat as their sensors detected energy readings that suggested a Class 12 civilization. The forest entity was deliberately revealing just enough of its true capabilities to convince them that this world was far beyond their ability to conquer or control. "Marcus, we've got Zilithian vessels moving to intercept us." Okafor's voice carried a new urgency. 3 heavy cruisers just dropped out of hyperspace. They're demanding we withdraw immediately and claiming this world is under their protection. We could use some good news right about now. Tell them, Marcus said, grinning as he watched the forest prepare its next demonstration of power, that they've just lost 3 enforcers to the planet itself. And if they want them back, they'll need to negotiate with Earth's new ally. The ground around Marcus began to rise, forming a natural amphitheater with him at the center. The trees leaned inward, their massive trunks creating walls that resonated with a deep, harmonic vibration. The entity was preparing to communicate directly with the orbiting ships, and Marcus realized he was about to witness the first diplomatic contact between a planetary consciousness and spacefaring civilizations. The crystalline formations throughout the forest began to pulse in synchronized patterns, building energy that made the air itself hum with power. Marcus felt his hair standing on end as electromagnetic fields fluctuated around him. The entity was charging up for something massive, a demonstration that would leave no doubt about its capabilities. Captain, Marcus said into his communicator, you might want to get your sensors ready. I think our new friend is about to introduce itself to the galaxy in a way that no one will ever forget. The harmonic vibration grew stronger, and Marcus felt it resonating in his bones. The ancient warrior was awakening fully for the first time in geological ages, and the universe was about to discover that Earth's newest ally could think on planetary scales and act with the power of a world. The harmonic vibration reached a crescendo that seemed to shake the very atoms of the air. Marcus watched in awe as every crystalline formation across the visible forest began to glow with blinding intensity. The energy building within the planetary entity was beyond anything he had ever imagined, drawing power from the planet's molten core through root systems that extended deeper than any ocean. In orbit above, the Zilithian cruisers suddenly found their instruments overwhelmed by energy readings that defied their understanding. The flagship's commander, Admiral Kestar, stared at his displays in growing horror as the numbers climbed beyond theoretical maximums. His science officers' 4 hands trembled as they worked frantically at their controls. Sir, the science officer reported, his voice cracking with disbelief, the entire planet is generating a coherent energy field. Power output is approaching stellar levels. This is impossible. No biological entity could harness this much energy without destroying itself. Admiral Kestar's mandibles clicked nervously as he watched the readings continue to climb. The Zilithian Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds, faced countless alien species, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for this. Could it be some form of ancient technology? A defense grid left by a previous civilization? Negative, sir. The energy patterns are completely organic in nature. We're looking at a naturally evolved planetary consciousness operating on a scale we've never encountered before. On the surface, Marcus felt the forest entity's attention turned toward the sky. Through the crystalline screen beside him, he saw new images. The Zilithian ships, as viewed from the planet's perspective, small and fragile against the backdrop of space. The entity's patience with these invaders had reached its limit. A beam of pure energy, invisible to human eyes, but devastating to Zilithian sensors, lanced upward from the forest. It struck the flagship's shields with such precision and power that the entire defensive grid collapsed in seconds. The energy didn't stop there. It penetrated the hull's outer layers, seeking out and systematically disabling every weapon system aboard the vessel. Admiral Kestar watched his tactical displays go dark one by one. All weapons offline. Engineering reports complete power fluctuation in weapons systems. They're not damaged, they're just neutralized. The targeting computers won't even acknowledge they exist anymore. The beam struck the other 2 cruisers in rapid succession, leaving the entire Zilithian fleet defenseless but otherwise unharmed. The message was clear. The planetary entity could have destroyed them easily, but chose restraint. It wanted them to leave, not die. Marcus's communicator buzzed with an incoming transmission from Captain Okafor. Marcus, whatever your new friend just did, it worked. The Zilithian ships are dead in the water. Their commander is requesting immediate negotiations for the safe return of his personnel. Tell him, Marcus replied, watching the crystalline screen show images of the captured enforcers in their organic prisons, that the planet will consider releasing them in exchange for a formal treaty recognizing this world's independence and humanity's right to establish peaceful contact. The forest entity pulsed with what Marcus had learned to recognize as approval. New images flowed across the crystal surface, possible futures where humans and the planetary consciousness worked together, sharing knowledge and resources. The entity had studied human history through Marcus's equipment and found a species capable of growth, change, and cooperation rather than just exploitation. Admiral Kestar's voice crackled across all frequencies as he broadcast his surrender. "This is Admiral Kestar of the Zilithian Imperial Fleet. We formally withdraw our claim to this system and request safe passage for our vessels. We acknowledge the sovereignty of the planetary entity and humanity's right to establish diplomatic relations." The words clearly tasted bitter to him, but the alternative was the complete destruction of his fleet by a force he couldn't even comprehend, let alone fight. Marcus felt the ground beneath him shift one final time, lifting him toward the canopy where he could see the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The crystalline formations throughout the forest continued their gentle pulsing, but the massive energy buildup had dissipated. The ancient warrior had made its point without unnecessary violence. "Captain Okafor," Marcus said into his communicator, "I recommend you prepare a full diplomatic team. We're going to need linguists, xenobiologists, and our best negotiators. Humanity just gained an ally that thinks in geological time and has the power to reshape worlds. The Zilithians won't be the last empire to test us, but with this partnership, we'll be ready for whatever comes next." As the Zilithian cruisers limped away into hyperspace, their pride broken, but their crews alive, Marcus realized that everything had changed. The galaxy's balance of power had shifted in a single afternoon, and humanity had gone from isolated newcomers to the diplomatic representatives of a force that could humble empires. The ancient warrior had stirred in the trees, and the universe would never be the same.